On October 18th, 1985, the original Nintendo Entertainment System was released in the United States. It received a far wider release in the US later on in 1986, becoming the most beloved and most popular video game console ever. Many kids my age can remember spending loads of hours playing Super Mario Bros., Legend of Zelda, Metroid, Castlevania, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out!, while also somehow finding loads of time to be outside enjoying the world. In total, between officially licensed and unlicensed games, there are approximately 1,300 possible titles you could play for the original Nintendo Entertainment System. But as popular and beloved as the NES was, technology always comes, times change. On August 23rd, 1991, the next evolution came with the official release of the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. By that time, I was a Sega Genesis owner and player. I didn't really notice when the SNES came out, but an interesting fact, just because the SNES came out doesn't mean that they stopped making games for the original Nintendo. In fact, there's an overlap of more than 3 years where Nintendo was making games for both the original NES and the SNES. And what we're going to do right now in this segment is we're going to look back at the final 10 games to ever be officially released for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Because despite there being the brand new shiny Super Nintendo, so many people still loved the original console. They didn't want to just give it up. This was the compromise by the company. They would keep making original Nintendo games for a while, but eventually they would focus all their attention on the Super Nintendo. So this list is going to count backwards from the 10th to last game to the actual last. 10 is a game called Mickey's Adventures in Numberland. This was a game by the Disney Company, released in March 1994, only in North America. If you couldn't tell from the title, it is an educational game, where you have to do things like answer basic math problems. It's an educational game disguised as a platform game, so it makes you think you're having fun, when in reality you're learning. There are 3 levels of difficulty. You can only die in the hardest level, and you get bubblegum balls to be used against your enemies. Number 9 is a game called Zoda's Revenge Star Tropics 2. This is also a game that was only released in North America. If you couldn't tell, it is a sequel to the original Star Tropics game, which was released in 1990. It's an action-adventure game. Your character is named Mike. There are 9 different levels you've got to play and beat different bosses from those levels. This is a game where there's not much known about it. I guess it's more of a forgotten title. I would think in order to make an impact with the final NES games, they would have to be something spectacular. Otherwise, people would just be like, nah, I'll go play Super Nintendo. Number 8 is a game called Detach J-League Super Top Players. This is a game that was released only in Japan on April 22nd, 1994. This is a soccer game, one of dozens of different soccer games released for the NES during its lifetime. So the idea, like I said with the last game, it's nothing special. So that's why when it got a Japanese release, it wasn't popular enough to warrant being shipped over to North America. The game was kind of interesting. You could choose one of 10 teams. You could choose tournament mode, practice penalty kicks, but nothing revolutionary. Number 7 is another Japanese-only game called Patchy Slot Adventure 3, Bitaoshi 7 Kenzan. Yes, that is the official title. This game was released for the NES on May 13th, 1994 in Japan. It's a pachinko game, which was a huge craze in Japan. I looked up just what in the world pachinko was. It's a mechanical game. It can be used for arcade games. It's used a lot more for gambling. In 1994, when this game came out, the pachinko market was valued at 30 trillion yen, equal to about $520 billion in US dollars, adjusted for inflation to 2026. So no wonder why they wanted to make a game based on it. So yes, this Patchy Slot Adventure 3 is basically a gambling game, but I'd rather play Vegas Dream. Number 6 is another soccer game. It's called J-League Winning Goal. This was also only released in Japan on May 27th, 1994. As I mentioned a few entries ago, there were loads of soccer games for the original NES, which made it hard for any of them to stand out. The irony is, it's like they didn't learn their lesson, and it only got worse for the Super Nintendo, with more than 60 soccer games released for that console. Reviews at the time of J-League Winning Goal said it was average at best, which when you're trying to break into the market, the dying market of the original NES, I don't think average at best is going to get you any sales. You can see with these most recent ones that I'm talking about, they were Japan only, because I think the SNES caught on so quickly in the US that there was no need to ship in any more original NES games. I say that, and then we move on to number 5, which is a tried and true character, Mario's Time Machine. This game was released only in North America in June 1994. So the idea, if you release a bunch of soccer games, no one's going to care. But if you throw a game out there with Mario on it for the NES, you might get some sales. The trouble was, they had already released a similar game for the SNES, and this was another educational game disguised as a fun platform game. If you couldn't figure it out from the title, Mario's Time Machine has to do a lot with history. There's the education. A little fun fact is that before this game came out for the NES, they actually had a computer version, an MS-DOS version of Mario's Time Machine. In total, it was one of more than a dozen Mario-themed or Mario-titled games for the original NES. And if you were curious, there are more than 200 Mario games in total. This is across all platforms. This is ones that include offshoot characters. So I'm not saying there's 200 Super Mario Brothers. It's just Mario, the characters, educational foolishness that didn't catch on. What we get to here at number 4 is Japan's final NES release, Master Takashi's Adventure Island 4. This came out on June 24th, 1994. When looking at the final 10 NES games, this is considered the best game on the list by a lot of people. This adventure game, you are Master Takashi trying to rescue your dinosaur companions. Despite it being considered the best of the final NES games, it did not sell well, which would probably explain why it was Japan's final NES release. It's like if you pour all that effort into making a really good game on a almost obsolete console, and then it doesn't sell well, it's kind of like, all right, let's go to the SNES. It is an interesting fact that despite the Nintendo being originated in Japan, that Japan stopped making games for it before North America did. We're getting to the final 3 here. The third to last game ever released for the original NES was Disney's The Jungle Book. This was released in August 1994. It is considered kind of an odd choice to create and put out for the original NES, considering that the original Jungle Book from Disney came out in 1967. It's like you're not exactly capitalizing on the popularity of a film if you wait 27 years to release a video game based on it. That would be like someone making a Sixth Sense themed video game now, capitalizing on that movie from 27 years ago, which, yes, Sixth Sense was 27 years ago. I'm sorry. The game is what you'd expect. It follows the plot of the Jungle Book, with Mowgli having to leave his home in the jungle and get back to his human village and fight animals and such along the way. Eventually, Shere Khan, the villain, you have to fight him. But again, you're almost 3 decades too late to capitalize on this. Perhaps they learned their lesson, because the second to last game ever released on the Nintendo was more contemporary. That was Disney's Aladdin. There's an interesting little caveat here in the fact that this game was released a little earlier in North America in 1993. It was released officially in Europe on December 31st, 1994. This game was released across several consoles, including the SNES, Sega Genesis, but most people forget there was an original Nintendo version. This game is also praised for having pretty good graphics for a Nintendo game. And like I said, it's more contemporary. Disney's Aladdin came out in 1992, so you can capitalize on its popularity there. The game is far more praised on handheld consoles like Game Boy Color and Game Gear. And if you're sensing a theme with the final few games, you're going to be correct, because the last game ever released for the Nintendo Entertainment System was Disney's The Lion King. Yes, the last 3 games released for Nintendo were all Disney properties. I had honestly thought it was going to be some sort of Mario game, but I was wrong. Disney's The Lion King was released on the NES in Europe only on May 25th, 1995. That means that this game for the original Nintendo was released 6 months after the release of the original PlayStation. It's just fascinating that those two consoles had any kind of crossover period. But being that this was the last Nintendo game ever, the developers basically put out the same version of The Lion King that was available for the SNES, Sega Genesis, other systems like Amiga computers, Game Gear, and Game Boy. The only difference between this game and the ones for the other systems was that the graphics were significantly downgraded. The game follows young Simba as he grows up and then leads to a final battle with his uncle Scar. But there you go, that's the answer to the trivia question: what was the final game ever released for the original NES, Disney's The Lion King? And it wasn't even an original game just for the Nintendo. It was one that was released on multiple different consoles. Did you think that in 1995 they were still releasing games for the original NES? My thing is, when was the last time you played the original Nintendo? I'm talking when it first came out. I got the Sega Genesis, I believe, in 1991. I'm sure we still had the original Nintendo at my house, but I was over it. I wanted the 16-bit Sega Genesis, Sonic the Hedgehog. In the future on the podcast, I'm going to do segments about the final games released for Sega Genesis, Atari, SNES, because this was a lot of fun to go through and research. And if this segment gave you the hankering for playing some old NES games, visit retrogames.cz. They've got hundreds of old vintage console games you can play online. I've shared them a few times on the podcast. I'll put a link to their site in the podcast notes if you want to go and spend some time playing old video games after you listen to the podcast.